All right. So this is an oral history interview for the CJAM Oral History Project, where we are celebrating 40 years on the FM dial. My name is Olivia Patricia, and I am sitting in the large studio at CJAM. It is currently 3:04 p.m., and I'm on an online video call with Kelly Hargraves, who is currently in LA. Awesome.
True. Yes.
So, Kelly, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. What do you want to know? Um, what do you want to know? Give me a question. How would you like? I can introduce myself several different ways. So tell me which one
Oh,
works for you.
okay. So I guess where are you born and raised?
Okay. So I'm Kelly Hargraves. I'm Canadian. I was born in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and grew up in Windsor. Moved there, I think, during the 67 riots, and we lived at the Holiday Inn. So I watched the riots as a 5-year-old across the river, and that sort of, that image is still burned in my mind, no pun intended. So yeah, I went to University of Windsor and lived in Windsor till I was 25, then moved to Montreal to go to Concordia.
That is so cool. I'm not too familiar with these riots.
Oh, you
I,
should check some history books. I mean, go on. You can
I'm
finish.
not from Windsor, so I'm not too incredibly versed with the
Where are you
history.
from?
I'm from Burlington.
All right. Well, welcome to Windsor. So basically, living in Windsor is being very aware of America as you grow up, because all the news you watch is, well, American television. And so American news, American radio. And I remember in my first year with Dr. Cunningham at communications at University of Windsor, having us do a project where we watched all three news stations from Detroit and analyzed what the differences or the sameness were. And again, that one exercise changed my whole life about how I understand America and media, and all the things that I think I understand came from growing up outside of the US and watching it through a critical lens and then moving here. It's been pretty fascinating, I have to say. And also it means growing up near Detroit means you got to see some of the best music shows in the history of forever. So that's what you have in front of you working at the
Yes,
station.
I
So
do.
enjoy it. Enjoy every second of it.
So when did you start your time at the university?
I guess I started in 82. And then after my first year, I went to London on a work exchange program, the student work exchange thing. And when I came back, I was really into music. I lived in a house in West Kensington with, I think, 11 Canadians. Like, we all slept on the floor, and one of them had a great record collection, and we just listened to music, and we went to all the shows. Like, we went to Culture Club where Boy George was playing, and we saw all the great 80s shows in London. And when I came back, I'm like, okay, that's what I'm doing. So when I started at UW, I thought I'd study film and television. And then I kind of moved on to study radio instead of film, because the film classes were at 8 a.m. And back then we edited with actual like glue and like, I mean, you probably haven't even had to splice tape like we did. We had to roll it out and cut it and glue it together. So I hated that in film because it stunk and it was 8 a.m. And I lived out in the county, so the drive was shit. And then I had to do it in the studios at CJAM, which was pretty funny because I wasn't great at it, but you get about like a foot per second of tape. So you could really make mistakes and keep cutting. And eventually I was okay with it. That's how we had to edit interviews and things, which was fun.
So that is so cool. You were in, so you went from doing film to more communications and radio. Tell me how you
Mhm.
started with CJAM.
Um, I probably wandered in. I had a boyfriend at the time who was also had just gotten back from London, and I think we talked about it. And I probably wandered in with him and said, "I want to do a show." So here's the backstory. When I was a kid, like in grade school, I used to do a I did two things. One was I would take like a little recorder, like the push button, and I would take the newspaper and I would sit and read. I'd do my own little newscast every night where I'd read the newspaper into a microphone on like probably the little Fisher Price thing with the yellow, the green, and the blue thing. And that. And then I turned our morning announcements into a newscast, and I did sports and weather because I was a girl. Well, sports. I mean, girls weren't doing sports, but because I was also being an athlete at that time. So there were four of us. One would do the announcements as the news, and then I would do sports and weather. So I was always into it, like from the time I was 10. But it took, I do think a lot of my answers end with the sentence, or begin with, but as a girl, it wasn't super obvious. So I walked in with one of the boys and joined.
That is so cool.
You should interview, actually. It's Lyndon Charles Samuel Way. And he's in Liverpool now, and you should interview him.
Actually,
he still does radio.
he came by Windsor last
Oh, he was
week.
just
He was in
there
Canada,
last
and
week.
I was
True.
sitting in my office and I overheard a conversation between him and the program director here. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh my word. You were here
Yeah.
you were here in like the 80s. Can I interview real
Yes.
quick?" So,
Yeah, it was great because he was in the bands Daisy's Hot Butt Spots and Prehistoric Cave Strokers, and they all lived in a house together. And I lived in a house with Pat Petro, Jeff DeFreitas, and Desmond McGrath. That was so Pat Petro and I went to high school together. And and when I was in high school, one time he invited me to go to a DJ reception for something he did. And I never felt cool enough to hang out with the cool kids. But when Pat invited me to go to that DJ thing, I'm like, oh my God, I'm one of the cool kids. So he was also starting at CJAM. And so I knew two people there. So I walked in and started in 83
that
or maybe
is
January 8th. Yeah, oh my God, it was so much fun. So great.
and on the Facebook call out post I made, you said that you were the summer intern in 1984.
I think so. I got one of the summer jobs, so I started writing PSAs. So I would go around to all the local nonprofits, which might be like the United Way or the Art Gallery of Windsor or a dance company, and I would write and record the 30-second PSAs that were part of the mandate of being a community station. And I believe that is also how I started my career in the arts. I think it was that connection that got me hired at the Art Gallery of Windsor, which I always forget. No. I worked for the Arts Council. What was it called? Arts Council, Windsor and Region. And I worked for them. So that had me producing events at the Art Gallery. I did a couple kids festivals there when I was 20, probably. And then right after that, I started working full time for one of those groups, which was Gina Laurie Riley Dance Enterprises. But it all came from meeting them all during those PSAs. And I still do those now, like in my work, I still write 30-second PSAs. I don't get to record them anymore, unfortunately. But yeah. And then I did music shows. And I believe that I did that Friday night art show that someone else in that Facebook call was talking about, because I feel like I remember interviewing people. But after I left Windsor and went to Montreal, I worked at CKUT there out of McGill. So some of my memories are confused between what I did in one station and what I did in the other, except for the kind of music, because I did it for about 11, 12 years. So the evolution of music that I went through based on music directors and stuff like that is pretty interesting to me. To me, anyway,
Yeah,
it's
well, it must be
interesting.
so cool going from like different, like watching how music evolves
Yeah.
through different radio stations.
Yes. Like I said, we went to every show at St. Andrews back then. We had comps to everything. And I interviewed Nina Hagen one night, which was pretty crazy. And in 83 or maybe 84, Lyndon and I drove out to California in like 3 days from Detroit. But when we got here, the first thing we did was go see the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Fishbone at this place that I have been driving around LA trying to find it for so long. And I just figured it out really recently, but I can't remember. Anyway, we get there, something ballroom, the Starlight Ballroom, I think, and I fell asleep. I slept through the Chili Peppers and through,
No.
yeah, they were also naked with the socks. And I'm like, I don't even care. I'm so tired. And I just slept through the whole thing. So, and then we drove back, and the entire time there was a tourist bus beside us, which said, "No one you know." And the first thing we did when we got back was go to the State Theater to see REM, and it was their bus, which is
That's
crazy
crazy.
because we followed them across the country listening to them. We had their cassette, and I'm like, if I had known this, I would have like thrown myself in front of that bus. That was like my favorite band, and I had seen them like 20 times by then. So it was crazy. That's how you know you're in the flow. Crazy stuff like that just happens. You're like, "Oh, I'm in the right place."
So I was reading some the Lance articles as well as some stuff in like the Selector magazine that CJAM produced, and I learned that in October of 1984, you guys started doing these bi-weekly dance parties at Vanier Hall. Could
Did
you?
we?
Oh.
Keep going. Maybe it will. Maybe I'll remember.
Yeah, there were like these bi-weekly dance parties that happened, and CJAM would like run it and do the music. If you
Right.
remember any of that.
I don't remember Vanier Hall, but I do remember that I started doing them at Gina Laurie Riley's studio when I started working there right after graduation. So it was 84, 85. And we would have after parties when bands came to town, like the Jazz Butcher was also another time I was on the road, and the Jazz Butcher played everywhere I was, to the point where a friend and I got a ride back to Windsor with his manager, with Pat Fish's manager. And we had this, and the whole time I'm like, you gotta let me do a party. Like, you have to let me do a party. I have this great place. So, and we did, yeah. And then that got busted by the cops. So he didn't show up. But the next day he came to my apartment, and I had all this alcohol and food from the party we didn't have. And I hung out with him and Max from the band. And they kind of became, lifelong friends. I ran into them in LA in a very weird way. I was working with some Italian bands at the Fonda, and I go out to the front to buy French fries or something, and they were playing the pub, and it was crazy because it was 20 years later, and Pat Fish just died last year, so that was super tragic. Um, but yeah, I had a lot of dance parties. I just don't remember Vanier Hall. I kept doing those. I've done them even in LA. I've done events like that. I feel like everything I've done happened, from what I learned at CJAM, probably.
That is so cool. Like what
No.
sort of so like what sort of skills that you learned here that like do you still apply or have you applied to like professional jobs?
Okay, well, the very most obvious one is that I started working in PR and marketing, because I realized if I can read press releases, I can write press releases. So I became a PR person, and I also, as I said, ran the dance company there. So now I still work in dance. That's why I left, actually. I thought if I was going to I started dancing with the dancers in Windsor, and I thought if I'm going to do this, I should actually learn how. So I went to Concordia to do a dance degree. Um, so that's the most obvious. The second is I'm super inquisitive. I ask people a lot of questions, and because I'm used to interviewing people a lot, so I'm pretty happy to just sort of, you know, ask them stuff. And I'm not too I guess I'm not shy. Sometimes I'm like, is that just that I'm Canadian? Like, people here are just so by you not being afraid to talk to people. It's so American to fear human interaction. But as a Canadian, you're like, I should probably be afraid you might shoot me, but I'm not. I'm fine talking to strangers. So, but I think that's also because I had to do it a lot, like interviewing people on air. It was probably Pat Petro who taught me to When an interview was going bad, to say, so what do you want to know about me? And I did that once. I did this interview with this freaking band from Toronto. Oh my God. They were a woman and it was just so rude. And I was like, okay, bitch, we're done. What do you want to know about me? And she just went, and I'm like, okay, we'll be back right after this. Get the hell out of the studio. Like, you're not doing me a favor at the moment. I'm actually doing you a favor at the moment. So check yourself, you know. But generally, they were usually okay. But I always remember that one. So anyway, that's the two obvious things I learned. Producing events, because I've done that. I now produce a film festival every year, and I don't know. I guess I just feel like I learned everything was feasible and possible. And especially when you do something as a volunteer, you're like, okay, I'm doing this because I love it. So I'm only going to do things I love. If I can turn those into my job, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to pull albums pretty well in a store. But I don't, because I never kept CDs or albums. I'm like, why would I when there's a whole radio station that has them? I do not need that in my house.
That is so fair.
So I've probably only purchased like maybe 10 in my whole entire life and I also really love terrestrial radio. I listen to it all the time. I don't listen to playlists. So sometimes now the radio stations have like a HD2 channel where they just play a playlist, and I will listen to that if news is on or some spoken word program. But I learned to listen to music all day, every day.
And like, how has your like love for music influenced like the style of dance you do? Because I understand you're a dancer and have like quite a bit of
Yeah.
dance background.
Well, the best news was that I could just ask someone at the station to mix music for me. So I always had, oh, and also I always dated musicians. So there's that. Um, and then I married one. But so I always had musicians around and original music to dance to, which is funny because even now in the film festival, so many people just pull some song off the radio and forget about this thing called copyright. So yeah, I was very aware of copyright from a very early age. And I can't believe I'm still teaching people, but I am. So yeah, that's how it influenced it. And my style. So by the time, okay, so when I was at CJAM, it was very indie rock, obviously, like REM and Husker Du and Replacements and all the bands of the 80s. And then when I went to Montreal, I started a 6 a.m. morning show, which was hilarious because I'm riding my bike down the hill in the snow to get there and going, what? I must really love this because this is not at all anything a human would want to do. And I started pulling old albums, and I called my show Displaced Dust because I was pulling shit that I knew no one was pulling, like soundtracks and world records and whatever you call it now. And I got really into world music and played a lot of like African or Middle Eastern because that felt like a morning vibe. And then I really got into hip hop kind of, I guess, pretty early, right? Like 89, I would think. And started playing PE and NWA. And then I was hip hop dancing, which, as a white girl from Canada was cool back then. Maybe not so cool now. I don't know. But I had a really great dance partner, and we would like be in the middle of the circle in the clubs at night. And yeah, so I had a street style before there was a street style. Like I like joking, like, I think we invented that move. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure I might have invented that in the 80s. And so yeah, I had a very street style and cool music. So I wasn't a normal like classical dancer at all. And I started working with another woman who's like still in a punk rock band playing bass, and her dance was influenced by skateboarding and basketball and all kinds of sporty stuff. So we did a little different thing. And then I moved that into making the films. And I think that my film making was really influenced by knowing how to mix music. And my curating of film festivals is very much like making a playlist. I just make sure it flows from song to song. And if I have to break it up, I do. But so I think that it all comes from DJing. Love it. I went to a punk rock show Saturday night, and there was a young girl there who reminded me in '83 so much, and she was skanking around the room, and I so wanted to join her. I was just like, I can still do that. I shouldn't because I'll hurt a lot tomorrow, but it was just it was really fun to see that that's still a thing. It's still out there. Kids are still throwing each other in the pit and like knocking each other over. Because I was saying to my friend, like in Detroit, I wouldn't get in the pit because I would lose a contact. And that was like not what I wanted to do. And I only stage dive once because I was like, you're going to lose a contact and you can't drive home. But yeah, but I lived it all. I saw it all. I know all the songs. I know all the bands. Yeah, it's pretty fun. I do think if you have to grow up in Canada, for all its naysaying, Windsor's a great place to grow up because you can do every single American thing and go home and sleep safely at night.
That
Like
is
we
so
used to walk,
true.
we would take the bus and just walk over, and I would do it by myself. I would just walk to St. Andrews by myself. I would go down to the Cass Corridor and go to all the Purple Heart was the big thrift store then, and just buy amazing shit. I'd go to the DIA and just sketch the Greek sculptures. And my parents were like, have fun. I was 16 and they're like, have fun. Dinner's at 7. Hang out downtown Detroit. I'm like, okay.
And you would take the tunnel bus?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Night. I mean, at night. In the daytime, I would drive, but at night, I mean, it was different. We just were there every single weekend. So I've been gotten there many ways. And I've actually have some friends in LA who are all Detroit people. There's sort of a vibe. We eventually were like, oh my God, of course. You're from there too. You're from Royal Oak. You're from wherever. So just this weekend, one of the filmmakers I'm presenting at an event on Wednesday, we had to talk about her using not copyright music. And I just started like, oh my God, 313 phone number. And it changed everything. We worked it out so fast because we just knew we were from the same kind of vibe. It was great. Except for, like I said, I could sleep safely at night with no gun.
So I understand that at the time you were involved with CJAM, the station was quite male dominated. Um, what was it like being a woman in that sort of space?
I think luckily I didn't really think about it. I didn't notice it too much, which made it easier for me to just be part of it. Also, like I said, I ended up with this group of friends. I remember like Mary Popovich and Clara Deck were the two women I can remember working there at the same time. But I also think, again, kind of growing up in that age of feminism, it was so, there was no, the 80s were really kind of interesting to me because they're sort of coming around like everything that everyone's working with right now in terms of identity issues and feminism and everything. The women in the 80s were just kind of allowed to be. It came right after the 70s where feminism was, equal rights was idealistically happening. And I don't think we waited for permission. I think also that happens a lot with a lot of gender identity now. I think we just did it. Like my kids still, I have a 28-year-old and 21-year-old. They're like, are you sure you're not gay? Like, how are you not gay? Look what you're wearing. Look what you did. And I'm like, because there was no issue with it. We just did. I worked with trans people in the 80s. It was also like, whatever. Okay. I feel like we're refighting a fight about identity that I thought we won in the early 80s. And then we didn't win. I'm wrong. I'm very wrong. But yeah, so I was very happy to do anything that was, I didn't think of it as male dominated, but you're right. When I look back, you're totally right. I was one of maybe 3 or 4 women who, did you count? How many were there? 3 or 4?
Oh, I didn't do count actual numbers, but just in
Okay.
my
But very
research,
few.
there's very few, yeah.
Very few, for sure. One cool thing that happened too is that we had, as part of our communications classes, we had to do a radio internship at the station. But I was already a DJ by then. But then I met one of my best friends now, I met her in that radio rotation. That my I can remember us all in this cramped little windowless room in the communications building. And I'm still a lot of those people, I can name a lot of them and I know where they are and what they do. Like Velcro Ripper, filmmaker, Laurie McLean, dance company, board direct, university everybody became a freaking professor except because I moved to the US. But Desmond and Lyndon, and I don't know where Jeff DeFreitas is. If you ever find him, say hi. He was the station manager who invented that burgundy and turquoise T-shirt, smashing all preconceived notions of the building coming down. And I hated that shirt, and I argued with him. Mark made it actually, Mark Sickridge. But Jeff chose the colors. I'm like, oh my god, it's so terrible. And then like a year later, I'm like, nah, it's fucking genius. Good job, good job. I was mad at him because we lived with his stupid ass cat who could open the fridge.
The cat could open the fridge?
Cat could open the fridge and would rip the bread bags and just eat stuff. And I'm like, dude, I hate your cat. Like, I still hate cats from that cat. But in that house, and if someone can verify this that you talked to, maybe Pat or Desmond or Jeff, I am pretty sure that the replacements and or the violent femmes slept at our house. But I can't remember if that's true or which one of them it was because we were the band house, so they were always kind of around. And then Clara and Pat met during that time and they're married. And so Clara was always there. She used to do all the undershaves of my hair because I had to have like a faux hawk at that point. So she would shave my whole head. It was fun.
That
I'm pretty
sounds
proud of this
fun.
time. Can you tell I'm pretty proud of my CJAM years? I think it was pretty fucking awesome, actually.
It's so fun to listen to these stories. Like, it's been the highlight of
Yeah.
my days.
Yeah, I hope, like I said, like it will be the rest of your life that you remember what you're doing now. And I'm curious to see like how your career evolves from it. So the one thing too, was it there or it was Montreal? I actually got a CBC interview. They asked me to audition and I bombed it so bad. And I'm like, well, that's when you changed your life. You hadn't because Patty Schmidt maybe who was at this was CKUT. She took over that late night Brave New Waves, and I auditioned for that, and I because I think they were like, we need some women. The radio station here, which is the biggest one on the West Coast called KCRW, and they break all the bands. They had very few women till this year. They only had they had two women DJs, and they were both on Saturdays, which I was too. Women get Saturdays apparently, and they just now have a woman music director. So they finally have like three more women DJs. I was like, dude, it's 20 years later. Like, what took so long? 20, 40 years later.
Hmm.
It took so long for them to go like, wait a minute, it's all dudes. Fucking crazy. But yeah,
I
but
feel
it's true. To answer that question, yeah, I didn't notice. And if I did notice, I probably thought I was pretty fucking cool.
well, I think you're pretty cool. And
Well, thanks. I'm trying to convince you right now that I'm pretty fucking cool. And you will be too in 40 years. You too can call back to this and be pretty fucking cool.
I sure hope so. Um, do you have like any crazy stories of stuff that happened at the station while you were here? Like any like crazy on air stories or something like that?
Well, just like that interview with whoever that woman was from Toronto. And mostly like the band stories, like hanging out with Nina Hagen and sitting on the floor and interviewing her. And somehow, I mean, I guess they were staying at the Rensen because I remember being up in the round tower in the hotel rooms going, oh my God, I've never been here before. And then the Jazz Butcher story was pretty crazy. And yeah, I think I told you most of them, like they're band related, like the REM or the Jazz Butcher. At the station, not so much. It was sort of just such a calm place to be. I loved going in, like, and on Mondays, I guess, we'd get the new stack of albums and just sitting in a corner and like playing them one by one to choose the songs for my show. Um, I can't remember my show's name in Windsor. In Montreal, it was Fervor. The Saturday afternoon one was Fervor, and that's kind of how it got into being hip hop because I wanted it to be really high energy. And then Displaced Dust was the morning, super mellow, weird ass music show. But I don't think, did we have show names in Windsor? I don't even know. I just remember, oh, I have a funny story, a Chris Burston story. I just saw him. He was just here, and we went out for lunch with Russ Wolski, which again is like, I love that I'm still friends with all the people from 40 years ago. Um, Chris, one day, he had a show called TNK, Tomorrow Never Knows. It was on Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock. And I was driving back from Toronto and listening. I think it was Tuesdays, or I just think that because it had a T. I don't know. And I'm listening, and it would be Chris intro. Chris would intro a song. It'd be 2 seconds of silence. Then Chris would extra the song. Be recorded, and someone was supposed to be in the studio playing the actual songs, and they didn't. So it was so funny to me. I'm like, God, it was way before cell phones, or I would have been calling someone. And I don't even know if he noticed, but his whole 1 hour show became like 12 minutes of right after this. Okay, next up. Can't wait to, you should listen to that. It was so funny. Whoever was there was asleep at the wheel, like really not paying attention, just put it on and walked out of the room. But we were allowed to make mistakes, right? But that one's pretty funny.
I think that's like the beauty of like community radio, especially a volunteer run radio, is that it's a really safe place to learn. And if
Mhm.
you do make mistakes, there's not going to be that sort of backlash.
No, and people now you have cell phones, so someone would call and say, "Hey, man, I can't hear you," or "The levels aren't right," or whatever. I mean, that is one skill I learned, kind of useless, but I can drop a needle like a mofo. Like I can, boom, I know exactly how to hit the spot. And we used to do, um, I guess they were called mashups. That's a thing I feel like I invented, like because it would just be by messing up a fade. You're like, "Oh, shit. Okay, well, let's play with it a little bit." So it seems like it's intentional. And then I guess that's what music became, like mashups and re-edit, remixes and everything. But we were doing when the CD came, when the CD player was invented. Fucking hilarious. But I was looking at it going, "Oh my God, it counts down. I will know when to fade because it's going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1." That was shocking because we didn't have that with albums. You had your face down there like on the thing watching, and you had to listen to the end of every song so you knew what it was going to sound like to mix into the next one. And that's what I would do when I'd have the stacks on the Monday or whatever, is play the intro and the extra to figure out the playlist. Which I guess you still do, but you do it digitally, so it's a little easier. A
Yeah, a lot of
little
our
less.
stuff is like just online files right now.
Yeah. Well, I was going to work at the radio station where I live now because I bought a house outside of LA, and there's a little station here called KSVG, which is a community station. Everyone's older now. It's not college. It moved off college and became independent. And I wanted to do a show there, and I've been invited to, and I have recorded a few, spots. But when I walked into the studio, it was just two computers and files. I'm like, I don't want to be in this dark room for that. Like, that's not fun. When I was actually physically moving around and moving albums and looking at things and pulling from the stacks, it was so much more visceral that was fun
Mm-mm.
for me. I don't really think I'd enjoy pulling files. When he showed me how, I was like, yeah, I gotta go. I'm too busy. So, I mean, there's other fun about it, but it used to be very, very physical, and it's still psychologically exhausting, I think, to DJ for 2 hours. It's a lot, but back then, you were pulling carts to play the ads and turntables over here and CD players over here and albums in the room outside you had to run, and it was exhausting physically, which was great. Maybe that's how I learned how to dance.
Just running around grabbing
Just
CDs.
running around in a little dark room. But I will say, like you said about making no mistakes, I love being in a dark studio like you're in with the lights down and just playing music and standing there and dancing. Like that's a whole vibe that I would definitely do again. But yeah, the actual not being able to pull and drop needles, that's gone. I mean, I guess you could do a vinyl show
Hmm.
if you're crazy.
I mean, if you ever want to come down to the station here in Windsor, we still have all the CD equipment and all the vinyl equipment.
You still have it all?
Yeah, we people can come in and do their shows like however they want it, like that right
You should
now.
have had Lyndon should have done one last week.
Oh, you should have.
Yeah, he should have. He's gone. Um, yeah, my parents moved to London, sad to say, just recently, and I was like, that ruins my fun. Because people are moving back to Windsor who went to school there and then moved away and they're going back because, like I said, you can still do all the big towns, big city stuff and live in a quiet, peaceful little place. And I hear it's probably like, I can't believe this, but no, wait, I'm thinking backwards. I was thinking about it being the coolest place, like weather-wise, but that would be for the States. It would be the coolest place I could live weather-wise, unless I move back to the Sioux. Anyway, whatever. I do the list all the time. Reasons to move back, reasons not to move back.
I guess like what's the difference between like growing up in Canada and Ontario and now living in LA where it's like warm and you're in that American like social climate right now. What's that like?
So, um, growing up in LA I can see it more through the eyes of my kids who are in their 20s. So and we were in Silver Lake, right? Like hipster central. And they always like, oh, I hate hipsters. I'm like, don't you understand you were born a hipster? Like everyone who's moving here is trying to be like you just got to be, living amongst musicians and artists and some very famous, like Beck lived down that street and so lived on that corner and Gwen Stefani's niece was in my daughter's class. So they were totally raised in like the center of the universe, right, for entertainment. But it was also just so normal and so neighborhoody and so small. And that's the thing about LA that if you're in the right neighborhood, it can be completely idyllic and you don't know about all the bullshit going on everywhere else, especially if you're like we were like parents were we weren't well the thing is you which is similar to growing up in Canada is you had to be driven everywhere. Like I lived out in the county, so we were always in cars and driving around. So I felt very natural being in LA, picking my kids up, dropping them off, always, and now the house I bought is in a smaller kind of farming city that really reminds me of Windsor. I'm like, that's why I can live here because this is how I grew up. So that's the thing about America. Like every corner is every couple of miles can be completely different than the one before. And also, like I said, I don't have I guess I have an outside view of all the bullshit that goes on here, and I can be very critical of it because I didn't grow up having to like believe the propaganda. As I said, I grew up being very clearly on the outside looking in and dissecting all the propaganda and what's real and what's not. So that helps. But it is funny because sometimes I'll say something and Americans will be like, "What? What?" I'm like, "You poor people. You what's that saying? Like, bless your heart." I mean, it's such a like inherently racist fucking place that it can make your head explode. And I think growing up across from Detroit, I'm so aware of the disparity between blacks and whites everywhere, but especially in America, because as I said, I grew up watching the race riots, like watching, you know, just the inequity and watching neighborhoods get redlined. So I was very aware of it before I got here. And I'm also almost more aware of it than people who grew up here, which some people appreciate about me and others don't. Because I do like to call people on their bullshit a lot. And there's a lot of bullshit here. And so my kids kind of like the same thing when they were in high school and grade school, they would be like, it's fine. My daughter, bless her heart. didn't think we needed feminism in high school because she went to a very small art school and everybody was equal. It was run by women. And then she went to college and law school and went, oh, holy shit, what the hell? I didn't know any of this before I went, which is why university is such a helpful thing. You can kind of see, you start breaking it apart, breaking it down. So we were kind of safe from it. Because they're Canadian too, not by birth, but we went to Canada every year. So they have a very outsider. They also hate America. So that's helpful. They're very aware of everything that's wrong. The other thing I will say though is that there's a lot that's very right about America on an individual person to person basis. Like you meet as many wonderful, empathetic, creative, helpful people here. They're just surrounded by the mishigas of this place. But one funny radio story I have is, and that leads into that, is when I lived in Brooklyn, and after Montreal, I moved to New York. And did I do radio there? I don't think so because I had my kid. But I was at the playground again before cell phones with my daughter. She had this friend named Juniper, and her dad and I decided we should change phone numbers, right? So he writes down his name and he writes Brian Woodbury. And I'm like, are you the guy who wrote that song, All White People Look Alike? He's like, oh my God, how do you know that song? I'm like, I played it on my 6 a.m. show every day because it's 20 minutes long. And I needed 20 minutes to wrap my head around doing a show. And they've become lifelong friends. And I'm like, I'm probably I'm like, well, I probably earned you $5 in royalties as my theme song for, however long I had that 6 a.m. show. Anyway, but yeah, so good people are everywhere. That part's true. And I know just as many, although now most of my friends are not American, they're from other countries, which is also very interesting. But I ended up in LA too because I loved Mexico when I traveled there. And I always said, I need to live in the English part of Mexico, which is what Los Angeles is. It's really influenced by Latino culture, but I can speak English because I had to leave Montreal because I didn't speak French enough to ever get a job. I got kicked out of my own country because of separatism. So, anyway, that's my story.
That is so cool. Before we wrap up, I was wondering if there was anything else you wanted to share or like any message you wanted to leave behind for, I guess, future generations of radio programs here at CJAM.
Yeah, I think that you should really appreciate the voice that you are growing and appreciate the platform you're given. And you are learning to do something a lot of people don't know how to do, which is communicate. And you're going to be a professional communicator at the end of it and use that power, wherever you want. If you go into like politics, keep seeing yourself in that booth alone with the microphone and the headphones and just you're in your own space and keep that own space with you as you go forward and just spread your love of music or of the arts or whatever. Like you literally are born with a microphone in your hand, not a silver spoon, but you're growing up with a microphone in your hand. And I have used it every single day. I think that's why so many people I know there became professors and I became a producer. And, I'm in front of people a lot, or a performer. Like I don't have a fear of speaking up in public for whatever reason. And I don't think you will either. It's so great. I mean, congratulations for making a good choice. You should be having the most fun you're ever going to have in your life. Sorry, it's not going to get any better than that, but yeah, it's pretty fucking fun. I hope you're enjoying it.
I sure am.
Yeah, good, good.
Well,
Well,
thank
I
you.
appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about it. I love thinking about it. And I love, like I said, I just saw Russ and Chris, and I'm still in touch with everybody. And I think that's really cool to still be connected with friends from that time.
It's really special.
It is, yeah. So choose your friends now. Like you and you and you. 20 2063. I think, did we used to have reunions? I can't remember if we did. This is the 40th, right? When
Mhm.
is it? Is it a party or something?
Yeah, we are having a 40th birthday party on, I believe it's November 17th or 18th at the Art Gallery, Art Windsor, Essex.
I'll
So,
be in I'll be in Armenia because now I get invited
no.
to go to festivals around. I know I'm going to Korea in October and Armenia in November. Otherwise, I'd be there, even if my parents moved to stupid London. Maybe the 50th.
Maybe
Maybe
the
we can get us
50th.
all back on the 50th. I'm sure Chris would be down for that. He wanted me to find some old tapes, and I am sort of kind of looking for old boxes of reel to reels, and I will send them if I do.
Awesome. I look forward to it. I've been chatting with Chris a bunch lately about this sort of stuff.
When he was here, it was the first thing on his mind. First thing he said, "Do you have any old tapes?" Maybe. I have old T-shirts. I know I have old T-shirts, but I don't know if I can find the tapes yet. But I'll try harder. 'Cause I haven't tried it all.
You seem like a very busy person, so no
I
worries.
Yeah, I'm crazy. I didn't want to be. Just sort of turned out that way. If for whatever reason, COVID made me busier. I mean, I know the reason, but yeah, it wasn't. I kind of enjoyed everything being shut down. I worked at a theater for several years before that too. So, I mean, again, the same thing. Like the other thing, I don't know. I mean, you know how many words you can say in 30 seconds, right? I think it's 74. But, you know, like just understanding time differently is what you learn when you're DJing. You understand how long a minute can be,
For
especially
sure.
a minute of dead air. I think I also talk too much because of being on the air. Like I would never stop talking, right? You would never let there be dead air. So if I'm in a conversation, there's no dead air. I feel it. As you can tell by my rambling for the last 50 minutes.
No, I loved it. I love hearing these stories and just
Yeah,
how this little station impacted your life in such a special way.
yeah. Friends, family, and job. Well, thank you. I'm glad you're doing this project. I think it's great. I'd love to hear it when it's
Yeah,
produced and ready.
I'll send it to
Please.
you.
Yeah, do.
All
Okay,
right.
cool.
Well, I
Talk
am.
to you in 10 years for the 50th.
All right. We'll see you then.
Have a great day. Thanks.
It was nice talking with you, Kelly.
Too.
Take care.
Keep in touch. If you're ever in town, let me know. I'll show you around.
I would love that.
What are you studying?